Tonight, we move gently, not into the cosmos or the heart of an atom, but into the quiet life of a tree. We are going to listen to a sound you have never heard with your ears, but have always felt. A quiet whisper. Imagine a single leaf. In it, a silent conversation is happening right now. A conversation that powers our planet. This is not a metaphor. It is a biological reality. A quiet symphony of chemistry that begins with a drop of water and a ray of sunlight. We stand in forests. We feel their shade. We breathe the air they provide. And yet, we are mostly deaf to their language. This is the story of how trees whisper, not with voices, but with life itself. And it begins with the process of photosynthesis. To understand this whisper, you must first imagine the silence. Picture our planet billions of years ago. A world of rock, water, and an atmosphere thick with carbon dioxide. Life existed, but it was small, simple. There were no forests, no fields of green. The air was not breathable for life as we know it. The world was waiting for a quiet revolution, a biological shift so profound it would reshape the entire planet from within. That change did not arrive with a bang, but with a quiet chemical reaction inside a microscopic organism. An organism that learned to do something new. It learned to use the energy of sunlight. It developed a way to capture the energy of starlight and use it to rearrange the common molecules around it, water and carbon dioxide, into something life-giving. It learned to photosynthesize. This was not just a new way to eat. It was the birth of a new power on Earth. For the first time, life was not just a scavenger. It had become a creator. A tiny green engine, turning light into structure. And as a byproduct of its solar feast, this new life released a gas that was, at the time, a poison to most other living things. That gas was oxygen. Over millions of years, this waste product accumulated, transforming the atmosphere and enabling the evolution of all the complex, oxygen-breathing life that followed, including us. Every breath you take is a legacy of that first, quiet revolution, a gift from the oldest conversation on Earth. So, what is this process? We call it photosynthesis, a word that means making things with light. And while it can feel like alchemy, it is a beautifully precise dance of physics and chemistry. It is the tree's foundational language. Imagine a single tree. It stands quietly, but it is not idle. It is a vast biological factory, and its work is constant. The inputs are simple. Water, drawn up from the earth through its roots. Carbon dioxide, pulled from the air through tiny pores in its leaves. And sunlight, the energy source, streaming down from 93 million miles away. The goal is to create sugar, specifically glucose. For a tree, glucose is its food, its fuel, and its building material, the energy currency that will power its growth and mend its wounds. This transformation happens in specialized workshops inside the tree's cells, primarily in its leaves. These are called chloroplasts. There are hundreds of thousands in a single leaf. Inside each chloroplast are stacks of discs called thylakoids, which contain the most important molecule in this story, chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is what gives plants their green color, but its color is a clue to its function. It appears green because it absorbs red and blue light and reflects green. That absorbed light is the key. Chlorophyll is a master at capturing the energy of photons, the particles of light, and using that energy to begin a chain reaction. It is here that the sun's radiant energy is first translated into the chemical language of life. This is the first syllable of the tree's whisper. Let's follow a single photon of light. It travels across space for 8 minutes, a tiny packet of energy. It passes through our atmosphere and strikes the surface of a leaf. It penetrates the leaf's outer layer, passes through cells, and enters a chloroplast. Its journey ends when it strikes a chlorophyll molecule. The moment the photon hits, its energy is transferred to an electron within the chlorophyll, exciting it to a higher energy state. This energized electron is unstable. It is immediately passed down a series of proteins embedded in the thylakoid membrane, a process called an electron transport chain. Energy being passed from one molecule to the next. This is the first phase, the light-dependent reactions. It cannot happen without sunlight. But chlorophyll cannot keep giving its own electrons away. It needs a donor. And that donor is water. To replenish the electron, the chloroplast splits a water molecule. H2O is separated. The oxygen atom pairs up with another, forming O2, the oxygen we breathe, released from the leaf as a byproduct, the tree's gift to the atmosphere. Meanwhile, the hydrogen atoms are stripped of their electrons. What remains are protons, pumped into the inner space of the thylakoid, creating a high concentration, like water building up behind a dam. At the end of its journey, the energized electron is handed to a carrier molecule, NADP+, converting it into NADPH. Think of NADPH as a tiny rechargeable battery, now holding chemical energy. At the same time, the dam of protons is put to work. They rush out through a special enzyme called ATP synthase. The force of this movement spins the enzyme, and this rotational energy is used to create ATP. ATP is the universal energy currency of all life. So, at the end of the light-dependent reactions, the tree has converted the fleeting energy of sunlight into two stable chemical forms, NADPH and ATP. The whisper of light has been translated. The sun has set. The light-dependent reactions have paused. But the work inside the leaf is not over. The next phase begins. The Calvin cycle, sometimes called the dark reactions, not because it requires darkness, but because it no longer requires a direct input of light. It takes place in the stroma, the fluid-filled space within the chloroplast. The cycle begins with an enzyme called rubisco. It grabs a molecule of carbon dioxide from the air and attaches it to a 5-carbon sugar already present. This is carbon fixation, taking inorganic carbon from the air and fixing it into an organic molecule. A TP is spent. NADPH gives up its high-energy electron. This provides the power to shuffle these new molecules through a series of transformations. A metabolic assembly line of quiet precision. For every 6 turns of the cycle, 2 molecules are skimmed off as the net result. These 2 molecules are the building blocks of glucose. From here, the tree can assemble them into glucose for immediate energy, or link them into long chains to form cellulose, the structural material of wood and leaves, or convert them into starch for long-term storage. This is the combination of the whisper. The fleeting energy of a sunbeam has been captured, converted, and used to transform air into the physical substance of the tree. Every trunk, every branch, every leaf, constructed from carbon that was once floating freely in the atmosphere, built by the power of sunlight. For a long time, we believed this was where the story ended. A tree makes food for itself. It grows. It releases oxygen. It was seen as a solitary organism. But we were missing a quiet part of the story, the part happening underground. A tree does not use all of the sugar it creates for itself. It sends a large portion, sometimes between 20 and 40% of its total production, down through its trunk and into its roots. And the sugar does not stop there. It is pumped out of the root tips and into the soil. Why would a tree give away so much of its energy? Because it is not a gift. It is a trade, an investment. The soil beneath a forest is a teeming metropolis of bacteria and, most importantly, fungi. For hundreds of millions of years, trees and certain fungi have been in an intimate partnership. This relationship is called mycorrhiza, which means fungus root. The fungi exist as a network of incredibly fine filaments called hyphae. These threads are vastly smaller than the finest tree root, allowing them to penetrate tiny soil pores and access nutrients and water unavailable to the tree. The fungi are brilliant miners, but they cannot photosynthesize. They have no access to sunlight. So a quiet bargain was struck. The tree provides the fungus with a constant supply of energy-rich sugars. In return, the fungus extends its vast network and acts as an extension of the tree's own root system, funneling water and critical minerals back to its partner. A perfect symbiosis. But it becomes more complex. This fungal network doesn't just connect one fungus to one tree. The hyphae of one fungus can connect to the roots of many trees. And a single tree can connect to dozens of different fungal species. The result is a dense, interconnected network that links nearly every tree in the forest. This discovery gave rise to a new concept: the Wood Wide Web. The Wood Wide Web is a biological internet that has been operating for nearly 400 million years. It is through this network of fungal hyphae that the whispers of individual trees may become a forest-wide conversation. For decades, the prevailing view of a forest was one of competition. Trees battled for sunlight, roots fought for water, a Darwinian struggle. The discovery of the Wood Wide Web challenges this view, suggesting that cooperation might be just as important. The idea that this network is a conduit for communication has captured the imagination. However, it is crucial to navigate this with scientific rigor. In recent years, some scientists have urged caution, arguing that the popular narrative has outpaced the definitive evidence from field studies. A major review of field experiments noted that while the potential for nutrient transfer between trees exists, clear evidence of it happening at a scale that significantly benefits the receiving tree is still being gathered. The story appears to be more complex than simple altruism. The fungi themselves are active players. They consume a large portion of the sugar for their own survival. The sharing between trees might be an indirect consequence of this fungal economy, rather than a direct, intentional transfer. This scientific debate does not diminish the wonder. It deepens it. It shows we are at the frontier of understanding a complex system. The forest is not a simple utopia of sharing, nor is it only a battleground. It is a complex society with elements of competition, collaboration, and self-interest, all mediated by this incredible fungal network. The whisper of the forest is a far more complicated conversation than we first imagined. Even with the debate, the evidence for some level of resource transfer is compelling. Landmark experiments used isotope tracers to follow the journey of carbon. By exposing one tree to carbon dioxide with an identifiable isotope, scientists could track where that carbon went after it was turned into sugar. In one study, a Douglas fir and a paper birch were tracked. In the summer, the birch, which was in full leaf, sent some of its excess carbon through the network to the neighboring fir. But in the spring and fall, when the evergreen fir had its needles, but the birch did not, the flow reversed. The fir sent carbon to the leafless birch, a dynamic reciprocal relationship. Other research points toward a hub tree effect. Large, older trees acting as central nodes, sometimes called mother trees, connected to hundreds of others. Studies have suggested these hub trees can transfer nutrients to smaller seedlings in the understory, potentially increasing their chance of survival. However, this is where the scientific controversy is most pronounced. While tracer studies prove that transfer can happen, critics point out that the amount in natural forests is often very small. Some studies show that seedlings connected to the network performed no better than those that were isolated, suggesting the network can also be a conduit for competition. So, is the forest socialist or capitalist? The answer is likely neither. The transfer of resources appears to be real, but it may not be simple charity. It's more like a complex biological market, with the fungi acting as brokers, moving resources based on supply and demand, and taking a commission. The whisper of sharing is there, intertwined with the murmur of competition and the hum of the fungal network's own needs. Perhaps the most astonishing form of communication is not about sharing food, but about sharing information. A tree cannot run from an attack. When an insect begins to chew on its leaves, it must respond chemically. Plants can produce an arsenal of defensive compounds to make themselves less palatable. But producing these is energetically expensive. A tree needs an alarm system. And it seems one tree's alarm can become its neighbor's early warning. In one study, researchers simulated an insect attack on a Douglas fir tree. They then monitored a neighboring ponderosa pine, connected only by a shared mycorrhizal network. The undamaged pine soon ramped up its production of defensive enzymes. The warning signal had traveled underground, from one species to another, a preemptive defense. How does this work? When a plant is wounded, it produces a cascade of internal chemical signals. Evidence suggests these signals can enter the mycorrhizal network and travel from the roots of the stressed plant to its neighbors. Studies on other plants have reinforced this, showing that plants connected by fungal networks can eavesdrop on the distress of their neighbors. Again, science demands careful interpretation. The claim of highly specific, targeted warnings is still an area where strong evidence is being gathered. Some argue the signals might be less like a specific warning and more like a general cry of distress that neighbors happen to pick up. Even with these questions, the implications are profound. The wood wide web may not just be a nutrient sharing system. It could be a forest's nervous system, carrying whispers of threat through the dark, silent earth. At the heart of the popular narrative of the wood wide web lies a powerful figure, the mother tree. These are the largest, oldest trees, the hubs of the forest network. The concept suggests these mother trees act as matriarchs, nurturing the community, particularly their own offspring. The theory is beautiful. A mother tree produces a surplus of sugar, sends it into the network, identifies its kin, and preferentially shuttles nutrients to them. When the mother tree is dying, it is said to send a final pulse of its resources out to the next generation. It's a story of wisdom and legacy. But is it true? This is where the scientific narrative becomes deeply contested. The existence of highly connected hub trees is well documented, but the claims of their specific, altruistic, kin-selective behaviors, this is where the evidence becomes thinner. Kin recognition has been documented in some plants. However, critics argue there is a lack of robust field evidence to support the idea that mature trees preferentially send substantial resources to their own offspring through the network in a real forest. The observed benefits to seedlings are often small and inconsistent. The scientific process is one of constant refinement. The mother tree hypothesis is a powerful idea that has inspired invaluable research. But it remains a hypothesis. the reality is likely a mix of the poetic and the pragmatic. These large, old trees are undeniably critical to forest health. They are keystones of the ecosystem. Whether they act as conscious, nurturing mothers in a human sense is a personification that may not hold up to strict scrutiny. The whisper of the mother tree may not be a deliberate lullaby, but the powerful hum of a central engine that helps keep the entire forest running. The conversation is not confined to the darkness underground. Trees also whisper on the wind. When an acacia tree is browsed by a giraffe, it begins to pump bitter tannins into its leaves. But it also releases ethylene gas into the air. This plume of gas is an airborne alarm call. Neighboring acacia trees downwind detect this gas and begin their own tannin production, preparing their defenses before the browser reaches them. This communication is not limited to the same species. When sagebrush is clipped, nearby wild tobacco plants pick up the chemical cues and ramp up their own defensive chemistry. A complex web of espionage and alliances conducted through invisible chemical clouds. A second, more surprising form of communication is electrical. Plants do not have neurons, but they do have a system for transmitting electrical signals. When a leaf is wounded, it generates an electrical impulse. This signal propagates from the site of injury through the plant's vascular system. Slow, but fast enough to act as a plant-wide alert. Recent research has shown that these electrical signals can pass from one plant to another through direct physical contact. An electrical signal generated in one can propagate into another, allowing a community of plants to synchronize their responses to a shared stressor. Trees are not static. They are electric. They are constantly sending signals through the air and through direct touch, whispering warnings in a language of molecules and voltage. Now, let us zoom out. From the microscopic dance in a chloroplast to the hidden networks in the soil, to the airborne signals on the wind. Let us zoom all the way out to see the entire planet. From this vantage point, the individual whispers of billions of trees merge into a single planetary force. Every year, the world's forests act as a colossal carbon sink. Globally, forests absorb roughly 30% of the carbon dioxide that humans emit. Billions of tons of CO2 removed from the atmosphere annually. A vital service. Every tree, a living monument of sequestered carbon. And then there is the oxygen, the waste product of the light-dependent reactions. The breath of life for us, the vast tropical rainforests and the great boreal forests function as the green lungs of our planet. The whisper of a tree, which begins with a single sugar molecule, culminates in the regulation of the Earth's climate. When we clear-cut forests, we are not just destroying trees. We are silencing a conversation. We are disabling the planet's carbon capture machinery. The consequences, as we see in a rapidly changing climate, are global and profound. Every time you walk through a park, You are in the presence of this life-giving power. The cool air you feel is partly from transpiration, a process where the tree releases water vapor. The clean air you breathe is a direct gift from its leaves. You are standing in the middle of a conversation between the sun, the air, the water, and the earth, mediated by the quiet work of the tree. We began by listening for a sound we have never heard. And while we may not hear the whisper of a tree with our ears, we can now begin to comprehend it with our minds. It is a whisper that begins as a photon's journey and ends as the oxygen in our lungs. It travels through fungal threads in the dark soil, carrying messages. It is carried on the wind as a chemical signal. The tree is not a solitary object. It is a communicating, responsive being, a nexus of relationships, a cornerstone of a complex society. Photosynthesis is not just a formula. It is the genesis of a language. It is the power source that fuels an entire network of connection that we are only now starting to map. The next time you stand in a forest, take a moment. Feel the cool air. Take a deep breath. Feel the ground beneath your feet. It is not silent. It is alive, with a conversation of unimaginable scale and complexity. You are standing in the midst of a great, whispering intelligence. And now, you know how to listen.